Well, hey there, guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're checking out the Carbide Insert Flush Trim Router Bit. Well, I recently picked up on Amazon one of these, and this is a flush trim router bit that has, instead of regular flutes, it has carbide inserts. Guys, this thing is a beast, but so is the price tag. So I thought it could be fun today to give this thing a little bit of a test run and maybe see how it compares to a regular flush trim bit. After all, this thing is not cheap. I'm going to tell you, it's $159 plus taxes. So what is it about this thing? Is the performance better? Does it cut better? Does it cut cleaner? We're going to look into that. And first of all, though, let's head over to the bench, and I'm going to show you what this bit is all about. Well, I reached into my arsenal of flush trim bits and I pulled out one of the largest ones that I have, and it's 3/4 of an inch in diameter. And this is generally what a flush trim bit looks like. You have two flutes here. Some of them just have one, depending on the size of the bit. And you have a bearing that rides on the top, the bottom, or both. And the bearings are the same size as the cut surface here on our router bit, on the flutes. And essentially, these bearings ride along, say, a template or a counter edge or what have you, and they trim off exactly flush with whatever it is that you're riding the bearing on. They trim everything else off perfectly flush to the surface that the bearing is riding on, hence flush trim bit. Now, this here is a traditional style, and I did not even know that these things exist. But look at the size of this bit in comparison. Look at the size of these two things. I thought this was a massive bit. This thing makes my big 3/4 look like a toy. And in all honesty, this is one of the biggest router bits, as well as one of the most expensive router bits that I now have in my arsenal. I don't have a single bit or set that costs as much as what this one alone does. So what this is, it's almost like a helical head, like what I installed in the DW735 planer here on the show. It has our internal workings here, or our internal support that holds all of our carbide inserts. And as well, it has these chambers here which will guide the chips or the sawdust out and away from your piece. This is supposed to be the creme de la creme of flush trim bits. But I don't know. I've never seen one like this. And when I saw it on Amazon, I had to order it just to see what this was all about. So anyway, let's take this over. We're going to mount it into our router table, and let's see how we make out with this. Well, in order to test this, we're not going to do anything fancy. I have a straight piece of 3/4 inch plywood here. I also have a 1-inch thick piece of walnut, and what I've done is on one side of the walnut I have listed carbide, and on the other side I have listed on here traditional. And what I want to do is, I've got some double-sided tape here, so I'm going to lay this out, and I'm going to attach this little straight fence 1/8 of an inch back from the edge of our stock. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to take this over to the router table, and we're going to run through this piece here using our bearings to guide against our plywood, and we're going to take a 1/8 inch piece or strip off of this walnut and just see how this traditional double flute flush trim does in performance. Well, over here at the router table, I have our traditional style 3/4 inch diameter flush trim bit. I have it installed here in the router table with the fence just a little bit back of where the bearing is. The fence is just here to give me a little bit of assistance and make it a little safer, keeping a bit this size away from your fingers. Like I said, I have set this 1/8 of an inch back all the way along on this 1-inch thick piece of walnut. So let's run this through with the flush trim bit. You can probably see here that I have the bit set so that our bearing is slightly above the walnut, but will ride on our 3/4 inch plywood. So let's pass this through and see how we do. Well, to be completely honest, there was a bit of chattering here. This is a fairly smooth cut all the way along. I don't feel any deviations as far as flatness goes, but if we change the angle and look at it through a different light, we can see some of the chatter here that was happening. 1/8 of an inch is a lot of material to take with a bit like that, especially in a 1-inch thick piece of hardwood like walnut. And while this does feel smooth, there is it's not a perfectly smooth surface. It is, well, it needs some sanding without a doubt. We can see here there is a tiny bit of tear out happening here that could be a dull bit. That may not necessarily be a factor that this bit is inferior, but it could be that the bit is a little dull. It could also be the direction of the grain that I'm going against. So either way, it did a good job. It followed perfectly. It's very flush with the plywood, but I'm curious to see how the carbide insert bit does with the same type of test. So let's get that set up. All right, so here we have the same setup, just a different bit. We have this carbide bit installed. And in this instance, I'm going to be starting, I guess we'll ride along the fence here, let the bit take off flush with the fence, and eventually our piece of plywood is going to come up and ride on that bearing, and we'll follow through and finish off the cut. So let's do that. I've had to reduce the RPM of the router just a little bit here. This thing is a much wider diameter bit than the 3/4, so I can run the 3/4 a little faster. I dropped this down by about 4,000 RPM in comparison with the 3/4. So let's try this and see what happens. Well, right off the bat, just feeling it, it is, you know what? It's a pretty smooth trimming. It honestly is. In comparison with our traditional, this is way smoother. This barely needs any sanding. There was a little bit of chatter, just a little bit, but it's a behemoth bit. I mean, it's got a little tiny bit of chatter right here, but it's still completely smooth in both directions all the way along. This first section of the cut here, this was taking almost 1/4 of an inch of material off. That is a crazy amount of material to take off for a flush trim bit, but it did it really well, and it's still nice and smooth. It had a little bit of chatter here, I can see it. And you can almost feel that. So that is way too much to take with this bit. But either way, it did a fantastic job all the way along. Very, very smooth. As far as it being flush goes, it is 100% perfectly flush with this plywood. There is no deviation whatsoever. I can't even hook my fingernail on it as I go across. Same result as on this side. Okay, so you know what? Let's head back over to the bench. So in comparison with these two, this one here had the much smoother cut. But then again, I would expect it to. For starters, this is brand new. The blade should be 100% sharp. This one here has been through the ringer and been through quite a few projects. So it's probably a little duller, and I had said that at the beginning. But that doesn't matter. The difference in the cut between the two bits was really insignificant. I really got to tell you, this one here did, as far as flush cutting goes, just as good of a job as what this one did. And let's be honest here, how often are you taking a 1-inch thick piece and cutting it flush trim, either with a template or what have you? This one here has been used for things like making ukulele bodies and trimming the soundboard flush with the body itself. And even then, you are trimming something like 1/32 or 1/16 of an inch thick material, not 1 inch. So this one here would do your job in general. Now, this guy here, like I said, baby smooth finish on the actual flush trim. But guys, it has 14 carbide bits embedded in this thing. And you can rotate these bits, of course, as you guys probably already know, 4 times. So you could potentially, when one side gets dull or chipped or damaged or what have you, you could potentially loosen, rotate these blades 90 degrees and get a fresh brand new bit out of it 4 times. So that is kind of a bonus. But here's the thing. These blades here are 12 millimeters by 12 millimeters, roughly. These are the blades I have in the shop, and this is for my helical planer insert. These ones are 16 millimeter carbide. So this is not compatible with this. So although I do have spares for my planer, this bit did not come with spares. So the cheapest price I could find so far for 10 inserts of this size, of the 12 millimeter, was $30 plus tax. So you would have to buy 20 of them because this has 14 bits in it, or 14 blades. So you are talking $60 plus tax just to be able to replace the blades in this once they wear out. I don't know, guys. It's a nice bit. It works really, really well. But for the amount of time that you actually use a flush trim bit and for the results that you need or that you get, I'm not so sure it's worth the extra to get the one with the carbide inserts. And there you have it. Flush trim router bits. The difference here between the carbide insert type and your traditional double flute type. So what is my final conclusion on all of this? Honestly, guys, for the sake of the expense of this, I wouldn't bother with the carbide insert. I really wouldn't. The thing is $160 plus tax. So here where I live, that makes it just over $180 for one router bit, which does the exact same thing as a traditional style of flush trim with the double flute cutting edge for a fraction of the cost. So on top of that, you've got $60 plus tax, so almost $70 just to be able to replace those carbide inserts if you want. You would have to be doing some serious flush trim activities to be able to justify the price of $180 for one flush trim bit. That would be some serious flush trim stuff going on there. So I would say to save your money and not get the Carbide Insert 1. It's a beautiful bit, don't get me wrong, but there are a couple things about it that make me a little iffy. Number one, the whole fact that those Carbide inserts seem to be kind of an odd size from anything else that I have here in the shop, which would mean more expense trying to replace them. The other thing too is when I use the 3/4 inch bit in the router table and I either wound it up or let it wind down after and before making the cut, the 3/4 bit wound down smoothly to 0 RPM and it fired up smoothly from the 0 to, I think I ran it at about 22,000 RPM. The larger one, the Carbide insert bit, not so much on the firing up because that's a faster process, but as it wound down, there was chatter. There was that brrr kind of a noise. And that tells me that, well, possibly that the bit is too large for the table mounting that I'm using. It could be more suited to a shaper style of machine. But as well, it tells me that maybe there's something there that might be a little off balance. So it could be one or the other. It could be a tad off balance. It could be too large for the application or for the machine that I am using it in, or a combination of both. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad bit. It just means that maybe it's not quite the right one for your home workshop. As well, guys, you have to remember this thing would never, ever be used in a handheld situation. There is no way on the face of this earth that I would ever have that particular router bit in a handheld router with me in control. That is a disaster waiting to happen, and it's better off in a table. For me, I would say this one would be better off in a shaper machine rather than a router table. But it is doable in the router table because when during operation, there was no chatter really to speak of other than a tiny little bit while cutting, but that happened on the traditional style also. So, is the bit worth it? Well, it's a nice bit, cut really nice, but honestly, guys, it doesn't do anything fancier or anything better than my much cheaper double flute 3/4 inch diameter flush trim router bit. That's all there is to it. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you found any part of this useful, why not like and subscribe to the channel? We have an amazing audience base here, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of it. It's a little bit of a shorter show this week, guys. I was just playing with this router bit, and I was thinking maybe some of you might find it interesting. Maybe it's going to suit some of your needs, and you may want to look into this bit. I'll post a link to it down below. It's up to you whether you or not you want to put that kind of cash out for it. Your call. Either way, guys, I want to thank you so much. I hope that you have enjoyed today's show. I hope you've learned something here. I hope you found it somewhat interesting, if not maybe a little bit entertaining. But more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.